What's going on, Phins fans? It's your boy Dillon, and I know it's been a while, since I've made a video, and I know this seems kind of random and everything. It's true that my life over the past few years has been chaotic and just, a giant mess, and it still is today. Unfortunately, I'm working through lots of things, and I'm trying my best to keep things going and to keep pushing through and to try and find a solution to my problems. But, that's neither here nor there. Although it is the reason for, why I haven't been the past couple years, obviously, because I was doing my channel strong for a few years, and then, life kind of hit. So, but things are going, so well right now with the Dolphins, and I personally have a ton of hope and optimism and expectations for this team and for this season, the rest of the season, and I did going into the season. So I kind of felt like compelled, I guess, or whatever, to make a video and just kind of talk about some things and talk about our team and the team that we love and love to root for. Because just, to let you guys know, I actually do think that, this is an all-in season for the team. Now, hopefully, obviously there's going to be things to talk about in the off-season, players that we'll have to re-sign, and, what's the team going to look like next year, personnel-wise, et cetera, et cetera. But that's a topic of conversation for a later date. And, as it is right now, I do think the Dolphins are set up and in a situation to where they can make a Super Bowl run. And I actually do, my thoughts and feelings on it are that they're going to win the division, they're going to win the AFC, they're going to get the number one seed, and they're going to go to the Super Bowl, and the playoffs are going to go through Miami. Now, if you guys have watched me in the past, I've been one of the Dolphins fans that would say quite the opposite, even when you have guys like TD, for example, who say Super Bowl every year, right? I've never been that kind of fan. I've always been a realistic fan, but I actually do think that they have the pieces in place to do it. So I am all in with this team, and I think that they can go the distance. And that is a good segue into, my thoughts on the team as it stands, as it is right now and everything. I mean, obviously they're 5-1. They're looking really good overall. The defense, I think, still definitely does have room to grow, and I think and get better, and I think they will. I think getting Jalen Ramsey back on the actual field is going to be huge. And I think that alone is going to change the complexion of the defense a lot. But it is the first year that Vic Fangio is here, and it does take time for these players to get used to him and his scheme, to get used to his players. And look, Vic Fangio's never had a bad defense. And I think that in the second half of the season in particular, they really will start to come on. And I think that they will prove to be a top half of the league defense by the end of the season, which is obviously something that we will definitely need because, if we want to make a Super Bowl run, we do got to be able to, play some good defense as well, even though our offense, of course, is on, a historic pace and all kinds of regards. I mean, they're setting numbers, all kinds of crazy, but let's not, glean past the fact that Tua is also on pace to set records. Tyreek Hill is individual records, right? He's on pace to break the single season passing yards record, right? Tyreek is on pace to break the single season receiving yards record by a lot, right? So this team is special. I do believe that. And I am going to talk about the Eagles game a little bit. I mean, this is not exactly a preview video, but I am going to talk about the Eagles game a little bit. Give me just 1 second. Hang on. I just want to see something real quick. How about maybe like that? I'm trying to find, anyway, whatever. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to find a way to light up my hats in the background, but that light is probably not the best one to use. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about the Eagles. I did want to, there's a couple things I actually wanted to talk about. The Eagles, you know, kind of my views on the team as a whole, which I've gotten into a little bit. I want to talk about this like system quarterback stuff that's been going around. And, you know, just kind of some of that stuff. Look, at the end of I also do want to talk about how I would deal with like injuries with players like Xavier Howard and Connor Williams and so on and so forth. So there's a few things I want to talk about. But let me say this first off. At the end of the day, it's everything. The reason why the team is as good as it is, particularly right now with the offense, and I think the team as a whole, is because of all of the pieces. And this is the reason why I actually feel good about saying that I think that they're going to go to the Super Bowl, is because for the first time, and look, I got to give Stephen Ross his credit. You guys know my feelings on Stephen Ross over the past however many years, but I have to give him credit where credit is due because I am a fair person and facts are facts. Since he sided with Tua and got rid of Flores, that cancer that I was telling you from day one that he was, ever since then, that was the best decision Stephen Ross has ever made, and it is paying dividends now, and I think will for the foreseeable future. Now, having said that, it is all of the pieces starting from Stephen Ross all the way down, hiring Mike McDaniel bringing in Vic Fangio, building that offensive staff that he did, you know, Butch Berry with the offensive line and the wonders that he is working with that group. I never thought that Austin Jackson was going to be what he is. I was on the from the perspective of that he's not gonna be. But hands down, bro, like, I gotta give him credit too because he has been playing lights out at fucking right tackle, bro. Now, again, you know, a topic for the future is now you're gonna have to probably pay him, everybody else on that offensive line. You gotta think about paying Christian Wilkins, this player, that player, blah, blah, blah. Now, cap, there is a limit, obviously, but it's always flexible. There's always ways you can move things around. They are going to cut players. I mean, they're not keeping everybody, you know, blah, blah, blah. So things will be done to deal with that in the future. But, you know, right now, they're just in a great position. And Austin Jackson, I have to give him his flowers. Everybody's been saying that. But I got to give him his credit, too, because he's been playing spectacularly. I can't wait to have Devin Achane back on the field too with Raheem Mostert because I think that is just a vicious 1-2 punch at running back. Obviously, we have Waddle and Tyreek at wide receiver. Tua is playing out of his fucking mind. I actually really like Braxton Berrios and River Craycraft. I hope he does come back at some point. I like those guys as the 3 and 4. However, I will say, and to touch on the Chase Claypool signing, I am going to try and hit a lot of topics here in this video while also trying to keep it relatively short. But Chase Claypool, I'm super intrigued by that signing because the one thing that I was saying about this offense that this offense doesn't have until they brought him in was a big body kind of receiver. Now, I was thinking you would probably bring in a tight end, not necessarily an actual wide receiver, because the tight end room was, you know, lacking, or let's say less deep than the wide receiver room. And I would think that would be the more logical place. But, you know, I mean, they could line him up as a tight end and, you know, whatever. They could classify him as whatever they want. But my point is, though, is he's that big body. He's like over 230 pounds and 6'4" or whatever, right? So why I think that is super important is because that's the one thing I think the offense was missing. Finally, we have a prolific run game, a prolific pass game, an MVP level quarterback, an offensive line that allows all of that other stuff to work, a head coach and play caller that is a genius. We have all of those things. The one thing the offense doesn't have was that big body receiver, that 50-50 ball, that go up and get it ball, that red zone threat. I think, and we're already converting touchdowns in the red zone at like 70-80% this team. But I think that number can go up with the Chase Claypool in the mix. And I am super intrigued to see how Mike McDaniel is going to work him in. I hope he starts playing and gets a little bit going in this week against the Eagles. I think he could be a sneaky threat in that game. And then just get, but you know, you don't got to give him a lot. Just give him a little bit and work him in a little bit more each and every week. And I think that could take this offense to the next level. With the defense, I absolutely think that they are going to get, and look, yes, they didn't play the greatest against the Bills, and that week 1 performance against the Chargers, they let up a lot, especially on the ground, but they have been getting better and better. Their run game, they've been getting better in the run game. They've been getting better with pressures and sacks. And I think once Ramsey comes back and we start to get a couple other guys, healthy and so on and so forth, I think that defense is really going to start to round out personnel-wise. I think they're going to get just more and more comfortable in the scheme. And I think they really are. We'll see, obviously, but I think in the second half of the season, that defense is really going to take off and start to suffocate teams, even the good teams. And I hope that's the case because, that would really then cement us as an elite team and a team that can make it to and possibly win the Super Bowl. But I do think that will happen. I actually have faith in it because I have faith in the personnel as well as the play caller, the defensive play caller, Vic Fangio, and the guy running the system because he's a proven guy. You know what I'm saying? And that's one of the reasons why I feel confident about saying that this team can and will be a Super Bowl team, because for the first time in my fandom over 20 years, they really have, from top down, from Stephen Ross all the way down, got the pieces in place. Look, I've always given Stephen Ross his credit for building the stadium and the training facility and doing good in the community. He's great at those things. The one thing that he's failed at, which is the most important thing as an NFL owner, is getting the football stuff right. Finally, I think he's gotten the football stuff right. It's not going to change all the years of shit that he brought us, up until this point. He still gets his discredit, I guess, if you will, for all of that. But he gets his credit now because that's facts and that's reality, and that's what being a fair, nuanced person is all about. So he gets his credit, and from top down, I like this team and this organization and where it is at. So the next thing, like I said, I want to talk about a little bit is like injuries, because I get it, right? And there's this conversation going on about how, you want to be able, you're thinking about, and even the team talks about it a little bit, kind of beat around the bush in the way that they phrase it, but they talk about February and getting to the Super Bowl. And I think that they should, because they are that quality and caliber of a team. And they're, if there's any year, just based off of the past 20 till now and the past 10, 15 in particular till now, out of all of those years, this is the best chance we've ever had. So go for it. But there's this talk about February. And look, I'm one of those kinds of people that believes in balance. There has to be a balance to everything in life. Now, depending on what you're talking, and that doesn't necessarily mean like a 50-50 split. I mean, some things have more than just two factors. So how do you divvy up the weight and the percentage of all that? I mean, it's the same concept as like who gets credit for the offense. It's everything. The offensive line, Tua's play, the wide receivers and the speed, the scheme. It all gets credit because they are all important factors that if you remove any of those variables, the equation changes and then the end result changes. It's, in a way, I know it's kind of a simplistic way of putting it, but it's math. Anyway, so my point is there's a balance to everything. So I understand that the ultimate goal is playing and winning in the Super Bowl, and that's true, and I think that this team can and will get there. But you also have to take care of business in the here and now to actually get to the Super Bowl in the first place. Additionally, there's an element of how you get there, right? Like I said earlier in this video that I think the Dolphins are going to win the AFC, meaning the number 1 seed. If they get the playoffs going through Miami before having to play the Super Bowl in Las Vegas, that gives them the best probability of making it the entire way. Now look, I do think that this team can play in cold weather. They're going to have one game in particular, and it's a tough game too, because they're going to have to go in week 17. They're going to have to go on the road to Baltimore to play the Ravens. So that's going to be a tough game, and it's going to be cold in Baltimore. And I think that they can and will play well in that game. But if you get all of the playoffs, first of all, if you get the number 1 seed, you get that first round bye, and you're the only team in the AFC that will get it. And also, real quick side note, I love that we have the bye in week 10 because I think it's a perfect time to give us a chance to get, that boost. And I think it actually, as the season has played out, getting Armstead back, getting Achane back, Ramsey's got his 21-day window and is working his way back. It actually lines up perfect. And I think Ramsey will be back for the Chiefs game. But anyway, so like I said, you have to play this balancing act of getting there in the first place and then also being, as healthy and prepared as you can when you actually do arrive in the Super Bowl. Right. But anyway, you get the number 1 seed. That means that you don't have to play, in the what is it, the divisional round. You'll be playing in Miami with your home field advantage, with that heat that's still going to be lingering around. I mean, it's certainly going to be hotter in South Florida than anywhere else. It's certainly going to be hotter there than if you had to go up north and play in Buffalo or in Baltimore or in Kansas City or in any of these other places, right? I mean, Kansas City's probably not as bad as like Buffalo, for example, but you get what I'm saying, right? Anyway, my point is you get, it's huge. It's huge. And then Vegas is obviously in Nevada. So that's a warm weather place. And it allows you, it just takes the cold weather element out of it. And your track team of an offense can just keep flying on all cylinders, right? So I think that setting yourself up along the way in the season to getting that number 1 seed is equally as important, potentially more important than, let's say, no, I can't say it's more important. Look, making sure your team is as healthy as possible for when you get to those big games is paramount, right? It's definitely top of the priorities list. But the point I'm getting at here is right, because there's this conversation about like Connor Williams. Would you play him in this game? How are you going to sit him? He's got that groin injury. Xavier Howard, right? Now, and then, Alec Ingold has his foot issue. Each of these players are, Jalen Phillips is still working from his back and oblique injuries, right? Jalen Ramsey coming off of his meniscus. All the players are different, and you handle them based on their individual context of their injury, where they are right now, the context of the season, so on and so forth. There's a lot of factors that go into it. But let's just take the most extreme examples right now of Xavier Howard and Connor Williams, right? Now, there's the one side of the argument where people will say you need to make sure that they are healthy for January and February, so you should sit them in a game like this Sunday against the Eagles because their long-term health is more important than winning this game right now, and potentially risking losing them for the season. I get that 100%, right? And that's a super fair argument to make, and there is merit to it, right? The other side of that is that on the other hand, this game is really super important, and the Dolphins do have a lot to play for in this game, right? They do, look, we have to admit that they do need to prove that they can beat good teams. I would say beating the Chargers in week 1 on the road in their stadium, I do think that qualifies, but we don't need to get into that or whatever. And they were a playoff team, last year. I mean, the Giants actually were a playoff team last year. But anyway, I digress. We don't need to get into all that. My point is there is still that element of needing to prove that they can win on the road against a good team, that they can beat good teams in general. I think this week is a great week to do that. The reigning NFC champion who went to the Super Bowl and just barely lost to the Kansas City Chiefs, right? So there is those elements of it. Also, you take it from standings perspective, right? Like, we're right now 1 game ahead of the Bills in the division. I'm going to say and assume that they're going to beat the Patriots. Now, of course, we would love the Patriots to surprise us and beat the Bills, but I doubt that's going to happen. So let's operate off the assumption that the Bills will be 5-2 after this week. If we lose to the Eagles, we will be in second place because even though we will have a 5-2 record, and our conference record actually will be better at 3-1 to their 2-2, they will have the head-to-head tiebreaker because they beat us. in the first game. Now, I do think we're going to beat them, and I think we're going to beat them pretty handedly. I think we're going to give them a spanking in Week 18. But again, neither here nor there. We'll get to that when we get to that. My point is, though, is to stay ahead of them, we got to win this game. You know what I'm saying? So there's that element to it. Now, is that the most important element? No, not necessarily, because I do think that even if we lose this game to the Philadelphia Eagles tomorrow night on Sunday Night Football, that's another thing. It's in prime time too. So, prove your chops in prime time. That's another element to it. Again, most important? Probably not. And back to the previous one, I actually think that even if we do lose to the Philadelphia Eagles this week, I still think we will win the division, and I still think we have a great chance to win the division. But having said that, winning this week, and this is a thing that goes for every single week down the stretch. I mean, I guess unless we take a 2+ game lead on them, then I guess technically we could afford to lose a game at some point and not super sweat it. But outside of that, pretty much every week is going to be, hey, we need to win to stay a game ahead of the Bills in the division. But not just that, in the conference, for that number 1 seed that I was telling you about and talking to you guys about, that I think we have a really good chance of being able to get, right? Because right now, the only team that's ahead of us is the 5-1 Chiefs. I think the Chiefs are going to win this week too, so I think they're going to end up being 6-1 to keep pace with the Chiefs and give us the best chance of getting a number 1 seed is by winning this game. So there are a number of elements to say that the Dolphins still really need to win this game. To win the game, to get yourself not just into the playoffs, but hopefully with the number 1 seed to get that first round bye, to get the home field advantage up until the Super Bowl. And then that gives you the best chance of getting to and then potentially winning the Super Bowl. So again, because then, I mean, if you're talking about from the injury perspective, if you get that number 1 seed, you get that first round bye. That gives you another bye week that no other team gets except for the NFC number 1 seed, right? Because with the playoff changes, there's no longer two first round buys. There's only one. One team gets it. That's it. So that's a huge advantage in the injury department. You guys have an extra week to get a little bit more healthy. So my point here is that with guys like Xavier Howard also with a groin, Connor Williams with a groin, here's how I would do it. And just looking at the schedule, right? I would play, where's the schedule? I would play them against the Eagles because I think that this is a game that they need to try and be as full strength as they possibly can, and I think that they need to come away with a win. And I'll get to the actual matchups here in a bit, but let me just talk about this real quick. So I think that they should play Xavier Howard and Connor Williams. Now, it looks like Howard is basically said he's playing, so I expect him to be out there. We don't know yet. I mean, I think Connor practiced a couple times this week, but was limited. I know he's going to want to play, but I also know that there is the element of, Mike McDaniel and this coaching staff, which for the most part, I do think is the right approach. And I think has helped us not get bit by the injury bug too bad so far in the season, is playing safe and, saving players from themselves and so on and so forth, right? So there is that element to it as well. So it'll be curious to see what Mike McDaniel's actual decision is, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what I would do. I would play both of them against the Eagles because, again, I think that we need to be all hands on deck, and I think we need to win this game. And it's a tough game. We're on the road in their house against a really tough opponent. It's not like the previous 2 games, the Panthers and the Giants, where you're like, we're at home, we have a high-powered offense, there's no way they're going to be able to keep up with us, and our defense should be able to tee off on them and pad their stats, like their sacks, like they have the past couple weeks, if you want to put it in that perspective, and they should, and they did, right? But the Eagles, it's not quite like that. And again, I'll get into the matchups briefly here in a second, but let me just continue on with this. So I would play those guys, and everybody that can go, I would play them against the Eagles. Now the Patriots, when we come back home, because that'll be a home game the following week, sit Xavier Howard and Connor Williams. Sit them both, whether they like it or not. Sit those guys. Do not let them play. Give them that week off because, frankly, I think we should spank the Patriots without even really trying. And again, it's a home game. We'll have that advantage. The Patriots are absolutely fucking garbage. They're not going to have Matthew Judon or Christian Gonzalez when we play them, so their defense is hurt by injuries. That offense is trash. I think we're going to spank them. I think we can afford to sit guys like Xavier Howard and Connor Williams and give, Eichenberg some more reps, and give Cam Smith some more reps, give him some reps because he really hasn't gotten, I think he's gotten a few reps, but not many on the defense. Like I think last week he got a few reps. But anyway, my point is get him some reps. Or whatever. Maybe if you do want to throw Jalen Ramsey out there just for a couple snaps, just to get him back out on the field and then, play him against the Chiefs. Because I do think he's going to make his return against the Chiefs. But anyway, my point is I think we can afford to sit some of our best players and allow them to get healthy. And oh, by the way, and again, there are varying scales to which you would do this for each injured player right now, depending on their injury. But don't practice them during the week. Let them just do rehab stuff. You know what I'm saying? And be in the meetings and walk through. Okay, sure. But don't really have them practice, right? Let them use the week, like for the Eagles game. Don't practice Connor Williams. I mean, him and Howard both practice limited this week, if I remember correctly. But leave them out of practice. Let them just kind of rehab. But play them against the Eagles. Then don't practice them really next week. Sit them against the Patriots because we can afford it. We should get that win. Not to overlook any team, any given Sunday, blah, blah, blah. But it's a calculated risk, right? So sit them. Then we play the Chiefs in Germany the following Sunday, right? That game, God, that shit is so fucking early in the morning. That shit is at 7:30 my time. Anyway, that game, again, another game that I think you really need to try and win at all costs. That game is a little bit bigger than the Eagles game because that's also an AFC opponent, whereas the Eagles are an NFC opponent. So that is fair to say that it is less important slightly because it's an NFC team as opposed to the Chiefs who are an AFC team. And then there's because of tiebreakers, head-to-head. If we won against the Chiefs, we'd have the head-to-head. Plus, that would help our conference record, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. But I would play Connor Williams and Xavier Howard against the Patriots. I would have the first real game, full game that Jalen Ramsey plays be against the Chiefs, right? Then after that, we have the bye week, then the Raiders game. I will say at this point, this is just how I would do things looking at the schedule right now. Things can change depending on how the injuries develop and so on and so forth. Maybe they do get healthy and you can play them against some of the lesser teams or whatever. But going into the Raiders game after the bye, it's another home game. The Raiders are not particularly good. That's another game where I think you can sit some of your starters and be just fine. You know what I'm saying? So unless coming out of the bye, their injuries are good and they're just good to play, I would sit Connor Williams and Xavier Howard for that game. Then the next game is the Jets. Now look, I've been saying for the past couple years that I think the Jets are getting better and better and better. I think they're going to be sneaky good. I wasn't one of those people who thought bringing in Aaron Rodgers all of a sudden guaranteed that they were going to be, the division lead or, going to the Super Bowl or anything like that. I didn't think that they were necessarily that one player away. But they do have a lot of good pieces on the offense. They are getting a little bit bit by the injury bug at this point too, though, like everybody is. That defense, though, I have a ton of respect for their defense. And I think it is pretty nasty, right? So I do not discount or discredit the Jets at all. I do like where they are building towards overall. And I do give a lot of respect to that defense. So what I would say about that Jets game, the first one that we play, is it's going to be in their stadium. It's an away game for us, and it's in November, the back end of November, so it actually could be a potentially cold weather game as well. For that game, I would consider that game to be a tougher game. This is weird saying not... because they're obviously not on the same level as the Chiefs or the Eagles or let's say the Bills or even the Ravens or the Cowboys. But with the level that their defense is on, because their offense is horrible. Their offense is trash, and I think that especially as the year goes on, we can handle their offense just no problem. It's their defense that's going to potentially give our offense a little bit of trouble. Now, I think, we'll get Armstead back, we'll get Achane back, and I think we'll get better and better as the year goes on. They'll, get Claypool in there a bit more, and I think that could take the offense even to the next level, blah, blah, blah. So I'm not super worried about either of the Jets games, but I would consider that one to be a tougher game and a game where you give them the respect and you play. Well, I think Jalen Ramsey will be well into the mix and established in there and be playing as a starter from that point on. But you play Xavier Howard, you play Connor Williams. Then the next game is the Commanders. It is an away game, but I think we could potentially rest some of those guys, in that game. Sit them for that game. Versus the Tennessee Titans. Back at home for the Titans, rest Xavier Howard and Connor Williams. Then we play the Jets again, but this time obviously in Miami. Sit Xavier Howard and Connor Williams. Versus the Cowboys. It's a home game, but I would play them in that game. At the Baltimore Ravens, I would play them in that game. And in the last game of the season, home game versus the Bills, but I would play them in that game. Now, again, things could change. Maybe the injuries get worse and you have to sit them for other games that I would have maybe played them. Maybe their injuries get better and you can play them against some of the lesser teams, right? Things are fluid in that department, but as of right now, that's how I would handle those two guys. Okay, real quick, I want to touch on this system quarterback stuff before I get into, my little preview of the Eagles game and my thoughts on that. So look, I have a few thoughts. First and foremost, every single quarterback to some degree is a system quarterback. Point blank, bottom line, period. There are very few guys in the history of the NFL that you could take them from one system to the next and they be an all-star elite player in any system with any coach, with any weapons, blah, 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 blah. That is so rare that the conversation around it is just kind of ridiculous to me, right? So, on some level, every quarterback is a system quarterback. Now, again, also, too, it's not even an insult because it means you're just doing your job well. And that's what you're supposed to do. That's what a coach, and that's one of the things that makes this situation with Mike McDaniel and Tua in particular, and with Miami right now, such a good thing. And one of the huge differences between Tua with Brian Flores and Tua now with Mike McDaniel, Flores was actively trying to sabotage his career. You guys know my thoughts on that. Mike McDaniel is supporting the kid, building around him, and building a system that plays to his strengths. That's what he's supposed to do. So to me, it's actually more of a compliment. And again, the negative connotation that it has, I think is kind of silly. Also, just real quick side note, and this whole thing with Stephen A., I've been watching a lot of this. I actually think people are taking his initial comments out of context because what he did say is that Tyreek Hill is such a special talent that he can Tua could throw him a pass 2 yards and he could take it to the house, or anybody could, because he's that type of player. And what he said was, more specifically, is that it's not just that Tua is throwing him the deep ball. He's also taking, these shorter slants and shorter passes the distance or for long gains, because it's true. And he does that. So does Waddle. So does, Achane can do it. Mostert can do it, right? And that's part of what makes this team special. I think people did take that out of context, to be fair. And to be fair, he has actually praised Tua and this Miami Dolphins team a lot. He gives McDaniel a ton of credit. He gives Tua a ton of credit. So I think people did take that out of context a little bit. But I also do think it's fair to say that Tyreek Hill should be in the MVP race because he's on pace to shatter the single-season receiving record. And I don't think that takes anything away from Tua. Now, I think the reality would be is that Tua would win MVP and Tyreek Hill would win Offensive Player of the Year. And I actually think that's fine and fair and just let it be. right? You know what I'm saying? But anyway, it's just kind of ridiculous. Now, look, I also agree that if you took Tua and put him in almost any other system in the league, or rather on any other team in the league, he wouldn't be doing as well. Now, but I don't think that says so much about him as a player and his talents and his skill set as much as I do as it would say the context around him, right? Because if you just take the 20 bottom teams in the league, excluding the top 11 teams in the league right now, well, yeah, of course, because that means he's not going to have as good of offensive line. He's not going to have as good a head coach, potentially a head coach that doesn't believe in him, depending on where he goes. He's not going to have as good a offensive weapons. There are all kinds of contextual pieces that would be missing, right? To the same point about how the reason why the offense is so good is because of all of the pieces. If you take any single variable out of that, the equation changes, and thus the end result will change. So if you put Tua in a completely different contextual situation, he wouldn't be doing anywhere near as good, of course. So if you put him on any of the bottom 20 teams, it's not going to look the same. Now, I would say if you put him in San Francisco, it would look just as good because he would have a really good head coach and play caller and a good offensive scheme. He would have a lot of good players around him and a good offensive line and a good defense and so on and so forth. I will also say that like Brady, for example, he would not play well in a scheme designed for a player such as Lamar Jackson, right? Now, Lamar Jackson, and they've been working with him on this, he's become a lot better at being a pocket passer as he's developed as a quarterback. But my point is that kind of system that not only allows for a quarterback to scramble, but actually designs for a quarterback to scramble at times. Josh Allen is another one. Jalen Hurts is another one. Patrick Mahomes to various degree, right? These are quarterbacks that work in the kind of system that will actually design quarterback runs because they have that kind of, threat with their legs and that leg talent. Tom Brady ain't doing that shit. Ben Roethlisberger really wasn't that kind of a quarterback, right? You know what I'm saying? Peyton Manning, not really. You feel me? So there are certain schemes that even some of the best, while they could probably operate them at a relatively high level, they certainly, in general, they're not going to operate like the running aspect of it at a high level by any stretch of the imagination. You know what I'm saying? And frankly, if you were to put him in that kind of scheme, you would be doing a disservice to him and the offense by putting him in that kind of scheme because that's not what utilizes his skill set to its maximum, right? Now, I've been saying this since Tua came out, kind of coming back to us. I think he's Drew Brees, the slightly more athletic modern day Drew Brees. And as long as they keep this, the same philosophies that they have right now, building around him for the future, I think he will have just as good, if not better of a career than Drew Brees. So, and again, the fact that they've built a system, go back to my views on like Ryan. Now look, I've never said Ryan Tannehill was elite. I think he's one of the best average and best game managing quarterbacks in the league. He's at this point of his career, he's going to be one of the best backups. I don't know that he's going to be in for that. Maybe he decides to just retire because it looks like his time as a starter is coming to a close. But anyway, my point was though is and has always been that Ryan Tannehill during his time with the Miami Dolphins was not even close to the biggest problem that we had on that roster. Now, I know everybody wants the elite guy, and look, I'm glad that things worked out to where we have Tua. But going into the past, had they given him a run game and an offensive line and offensive weapons and built a good defense and gave him a good head coach, either offensive or defensive minded, frankly, I don't care as long as he was a good overall overall coach that was able to build a good staff and also supported his quarterback. Because Ryan Tannehill never really had support from this organization or really any of his head coaches during his tenure here, particularly in the early days, right? So he was not the biggest issue for this Miami Dolphins team. And I think the things that happened the 2 or 3 years after he left Miami is proof of that. look, again, he's never going to be, a top 5 elite quarterback. He's always going to be that middle of the pack quarterback at best, but he is the best of those middle of the pack quarterbacks. And if you actually put the proper team around him, he can take you to, some of those big games, those championship games, win the division, go to the AFC championship game. Now, he didn't make it to the Super Bowl, and I was rooting for him to at least make it to one Super Bowl so he could at least say that, because I am a Tannehill fan, and I do give that man respect, unlike, a lot of Dolphins fans. But the point is it's the big picture. It's not just the quarterback. Never has been, never will be. Never, ever, ever, ever will be. And then, obviously tying into the system quarterback, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, anyway, to wrap that little portion of it up, I love that they have the proper system and head coach and all the support for this kid. And there's I watched the little interview he did. I don't remember. I don't know who the interviewer was, but he was talking the whole time in their interview. Tua was talking. It was a short interview. It was like 15 minutes or something like that. He was talking about how he's got the freedom to be himself and who he is as a person, and that is huge for not just a quarterback but players in general. So I love what they got going on right now, and I hope they just continue to build in that direction and build around him for the foreseeable future, because I think that this really could be the beginning of the next Dolphins dynasty, baby. So I'm really pumped about that. All right, now all of that. So this video probably will likely be roughly an hour at the end of the day, because there were a lot of things to talk about, and I obviously haven't made a video in a while. But let's go ahead and actually get to this Eagles matchup. Look, it's going to be a tough game. We're on the road against a really good team, the reigning NFC champions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Look, it's not going to be an easy. My biggest concern is probably got to be their defensive line against our offensive line. Right? No Armstead, but Kendall Lamb has been doing great. But this is why I would play Connor Williams, because I would want to make sure that we have that offensive line as good as it can be. Not just so that way we can potentially win, but also because you don't want your quarterback taking a lot of hits. You know what I'm saying? And they've been great up to this point in the season. But the one game that they did play a good defensive front, the Buffalo Bills, in their home stadium, they did let up 4 sacks, right? And that's the most, through any single game this season. The rest of the games have been, basically none, but one or none. You know what I'm saying? So I would have Connor Williams. Although Jalen Carter does look like he's going to be back in this game, but he's not at 100%. But even if he didn't play, they still have a really good defensive front and front seven. So with Hassan Reddick and Floyd and all these guys, Leonard Floyd and all these guys they got up there, they're pretty deep at that position too. So, they got guys that they can roll in. The offensive line is that's going to be one of the key matchups for this game, is how that offensive line is going to hold up against their defensive line. Now, I do think that our offense is going to be able to move the ball. I do think they're going to be able to score points. And if I had to say, I would say that overall this game is likely to be relatively high scoring and probably a bit of a shootout. Probably, I would say both teams end up in the 30s. And, the last team to have the ball could end up being the team that gets the win, just simply because they're the last team that has the ball and has the opportunity to drive downfield to get the game-winning field goal. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's the kind of game that it's going to be. It's obviously their stadium going to be a tough environment. It's going to be loud. Communication is going to be key in this game for the offense. But I do like our matchups on the perimeter and with our skill players and with Tua, with the way that Mike McDaniel schemes things up and without fast Tua at getting the ball out, it does, the scheme and his abilities do kind of take defensive lines out of the game a little bit to some degree, because they just don't have time to get to the quarterback. But that is also dependent on making sure that the offensive line doesn't have like major glaring breakdowns and just has like free runner after free runner after free runner. Now, like if you get a free runner because you're setting up a screen and that's how it's designed, that's one thing, right? But having free runners because there's breakdowns on the offensive line because of miscommunication, missed assignments, you have a player that's not as good. Sorry, Eichenberg. it can be a little scary. But again, on the outside, especially because they're really banged up in the secondary. Bradley Roby's been ruled out. Reed Blankenship has been ruled out. And some of those guys were backups. Reed Blankenship was a backup to begin with, from my understanding, because they've already had injuries in that secondary. Darius Slay is expected to play, from my understanding, but he's also banged up, so probably not at 100%. Right? So I do think that there's going to be opportunities for these guys out on the perimeter, and even in the run game on the perimeter. We're an outside zone primarily, run game anyway. So stretch them out to the sides. That's part of how that's partly how Mike McDaniel schemes up taking away defensive lines in the pass rush, right? Is by getting things out so fast to the perimeter. So I think overall the Dolphins do have a really good chance. Now, when it comes to their offense, look, they haven't been hitting on all cylinders. Jalen Hurts has been struggling. He's thrown more interceptions, I think, in the first handful of games than he threw all last year or something like that. Now, look, A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith are great wide receivers. Swift is a great running back. They do have a really good offensive line, although if Lane Johnson does play, he's probably not going to be at 100% himself, right? So there are going to be some elements. Look, it's going to be a tough matchup no matter what, but I do think that our defense can get some stops, at least in key situations. And frankly, I know a lot of people don't super love the bend but don't break kind of a defense, but honestly, if they prove they can do it consistently, meaning, even if they do give up a chunk of yardage, but they keep teams out of the end zone, I can be okay with it. Now, I do think, again, as the season goes on, particularly after the return of Ramsey, our defense is going to get a lot more shut down, particularly in the passing game, because I think that is where our biggest current Achilles heel is. Again, because I do think that they have gotten better and better each week in the run game on defense and in pass rush. So I think our coverage, once that gets up to speed, then the defense is really going to start getting lethal, and they'll start getting more turnovers and stuff like that as well. But for this week, it's going to be a tough matchup, man. But I do think that they can get stops, at least in key moments and when they need to. I do think that they have a chance for getting some turnovers, and I think they need to certainly try and force turnovers, but also make sure you're not missing tackles. So, I don't know. It's going to be really interesting. I am going to predict the Dolphins win in this. Like I said, I think both teams get, into 30s. It could end up being like a 34-31 or a 36-33 kind of game. You know what I'm saying? Something along those lines. And I do think at the end of the day, it will end up being a little bit more high scoring, because I think at least in the first half, well, I don't know. It's hard to say. My initial thought was that in the first half, offenses will kind of have their way. But, thinking about it, I think it actually could be a defensive-heavy first half with both offenses maybe waking up a little bit. Not to say that they won't score any points in the first half, but, maybe they only get up to 14 points, 17 points each, somewhere along those lines in the first half. And then they really start to wake up in the second half and get up to their 30 or, maybe into the 40s for both offenses. But anyway, it's a really interesting game. Like I said, you know how I feel about injuries, how I play that, my view of how things are going and what you have to play for now versus later on in the season and so on and so forth. So I am going to go ahead and wrap it up. Like I said, things have been personally a struggle for me the past few years on a number of levels: mental health, financially, a lot of different areas in my life. So I'm still struggling with a lot of those things, or whatever. And I'm doing my best. Like I said, I could end up homeless just this next month, so I may not even make it, the entire season without ending up homeless and so on and so forth. But I'm trying, I'm working really hard. But either way, I just kind of felt like, with everything going on right now, I just wanted to talk about it a little bit and talk about my team and just kind of have some positive things in my head and vibes going and stuff like that. And I wanted to talk about this matchup a little bit. So anyway, but like I said, I am going to get out of here. I hope you guys, like my comments and my commentary and appreciate the video and everything like that. Look, I mean, I am going to try and make some more videos for, as long as I'm able to and stuff like that. I'm going to make a concerted effort to, like, maybe throughout the week, maybe make a video here and there, maybe at least, once a week for as long as I'm able to, make a video and maybe at least talk about the upcoming matchup and where we are right now in the season and stuff like that. But I'm not, it's not, because of the current situation in my life, I'm definitely not going to be able to do it like, full-time or heavy, unfortunately. I wish I could, man. I wish I could do this as my job. I mean, that would solve a lot of my problems. If I could get paid to do this and do this on a regular basis and full-time, I would, be able to pay my bills, not sweat it. My situation would improve. I'd be doing something I love, et cetera, et cetera. But unfortunately, it's not really in the cards right now. So, it's not really going to be, something that I prioritize, but I am going to make a concerted effort to at least try and make like a video a week for as long as I'm able to and for as long as the season is going and so on and so forth, because it's just, I think that this team really is special, and I do think that we are going to make it to the Super Bowl. I think we're going to have at least 13, 14 wins. We're going to end up with, let's say somewhere between like 12 to 14 wins. I think we're going to win the division. I think we'll get the number 1 seed, whatever that's going to take, 13, 14 wins. I think we'll get the number 1 seed. And I think we're going to actually end up being, 8-1 going into the bye, because I think we're going to beat the Eagles on tomorrow night. I think it'll be a relatively easy win against the Patriots at home, and I think we will beat the Chiefs in Germany, and then really start to get from the league as a whole, from the national media, the respect that this team deserves, and put us well on track for winning the division, getting that number 1 seed, going to the Super Bowl, crushing records, both team records, NFL records, personal records for Tyreek and Tua, and so on and so forth. It's going to be amazing. I think this team really is special, and I'm excited to see how the rest of the season plays out. Hopefully I'll be around for all of it. So anyway, let me get out of here. Like I said, I hope you guys enjoy it, and I will try and make some more videos. So with that, I appreciate you guys, and let's just keep it up, man. Let's see what happens tomorrow night in Philadelphia. I'm super excited about it, and fins up.
7 seconds left. Tannehill will throw it, and this will end it after the shuttle. Taken place here in South Florida. The Dolphins have done it. They keep their season alive. 69 yards. Wow. Pure joy. Miami wins it.